Welcome to episode 1 of the Life by Design podcast. I'm Angela Weiss, nurse practitioner, author, and founder of Life by Design Press. Each week we talk about mental health, relationships, faith, healing, and the quiet work of becoming who you are created to be. Whether you are navigating burnout, rebuilding after loss, learning to love without losing yourself, or simply trying to live with more peace and intention, you are welcome here. So grab a cup of coffee, get cozy, and let's begin. Why this podcast exists. I want to start today by talking about why I even began this podcast, because there are thousands of podcasts. Why another one? There are mental health podcasts, relationship podcasts, faith podcasts, self-help podcasts, advice podcasts. So why? Why this one and why now? And honestly, this podcast didn't become a marketing idea that I came up with. It didn't begin as a business plan. It began because of real conversations, the kind that quietly happen in exam rooms, in telehealth visits, in moments when people finally exhale and say something they've been carrying for years. I sit with people every day who look successful on the outside, people who are competent, strong, kind, responsible, people who have careers, families, degrees, responsibilities, and yet somewhere in the middle of everything that they've built, they feel tired, confused, lonely, or quietly disappointed with how life has unfolded. Sometimes they're burned out. Sometimes they're grieving something they can't easily name. Sometimes they're trying to understand why relationships keep hurting even when they try so hard to love well. And over time, I began noticing something. People were asking different questions, but underneath those questions was often the same longing. They wanted peace, not perfection. They wanted healthy love, not intensity. They wanted purpose, not just productivity. And many of them believed they were behind. Behind in relationships, healing, careers, spirituality, emotionally. Behind compared to everyone else. And again, I found myself saying the same thing. You're not behind. You're in a season. And sometimes that season is what I call the waiting room. Most of us associate waiting rooms with frustration, hospitals, delays, uncertainty. You sit there wondering when your name will be called. You watch other people leave before you. You wonder if something is wrong. You wonder, how long is this going to even take? You wonder why you're still sitting there. Life has waiting rooms too. After divorce, after loss, after burnout, after career changes, after children grow up, after betrayal, after illness, after dreams change, after faith feels quiet. And people often believe the waiting room means life has paused, that real life is happening somewhere else, that everyone else is moving forward while they are stuck. But what I have learned both professionally and personally is this. The waiting room is not empty. It's preparation. Sometimes it's healing you didn't have time for before. Sometimes it's identity rebuilding. Sometimes it's God showing you. Slow down long enough to ask different questions. Sometimes it's learning boundaries or rest or discernment or self-respect. The waiting room is not punishment. The waiting room is becoming. You don't have to agree with everything here. And before we go further, I want to say something important. You don't have to listen to every episode. You don't have to agree with everything I say. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, and trust yourself as you listen. Because this space is not about rigid rules. It's about thoughtful reflection, gentle discernment, honest conversations. My perspective as a nurse practitioner is that I sit with people during some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. I hear stories about marriages ending, people trying to rebuild lives, professionals who suddenly can't get out of bed because burnout finally caught up with them. Parents wondering who they are now that their children are grown. Men who feel enormous pressure to hold everything together, but have never been taught how to talk about their emotions. They've been told it's not safe to talk about emotions. Women who have carried emotional responsibility for everyone around them for decades. People who appear strong but quietly wonder why relationships feel so confusing. And one question appears again and again. How do I know what healthy actually looks like? Not exciting, not dramatic, healthy. Because intensity can feel like chemistry. Loneliness can feel like love. Urgency can feel like hope. And familiarity can feel like destiny. But healthy relationships, whether romantic, friendships, or even relationships with ourselves, are often quieter, steadier, safer, and many people were never taught how to recognize that. Why life by design? This phrase, life by design, comes from something I began noticing years ago. People drift into lives, careers happen, relationships happen, responsibilities accumulate, and suddenly someone wakes up at 40 or 50 or 60 and realizes that they've been reacting to life instead of choosing it. They didn't intentionally choose burnout. They didn't intentionally lose themselves. They didn't intentionally accept less than they deserved. It happened slowly, one accommodation at a time, one compromise at a time, one season of survival at a time. Life by design is the belief that small intentional choices repeated gently and consistently can change the direction of a life. Not overnight, quietly. We live in a world that tells us everything should happen quickly. Find love quickly, heal quickly, be productive quickly, lose weight quickly, fix trauma quickly, start businesses quickly, move on quickly. But healing doesn't respond well to urgency. Relationships built in urgency often become confusing. Faith built in urgency often becomes fragile. Growth requires space, and sometimes waiting is not delay. It's alignment. A story I hear often is that someone meets a person who feels electric immediately, texting constantly, emotional intensity, deep conversations quickly. They feel chosen, seen, alive. Then slowly communication changes. Plans shift, consistency disappears, anxiety grows. They begin questioning themselves, wondering what they did wrong, trying harder, hoping clarity will come later. Many people interpret that emotional roller coaster as passion. Sometimes it's activation. And then someone comes along, steady, kind, predictable. They show up when they say they will. Communication feels calm. There are no games, and the person says something fascinating. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm not as excited as I used to get. What they are experiencing is unfamiliar safety. Peace can feel strange if chaos has been familiar. That realization changes lives. The waiting room framework, over time, I began seeing patterns. Healing tends to move through phases. Awareness, discernment, staying grounded, faith, and integration. You learn to recognize patterns. You learn to choose intentionally. You learn not to lose yourself when connection appears. And eventually, you learn to trust timing without forcing outcomes. That journey is what we will explore together. Faith in the waiting. That's also a part of this conversation. Not as pressure, not as perfection, but as meaning. Because many people quietly asked, what does timing feel so uncertain for? Why do some doors close? Why do some relationships, and even when we prayed for them, not show up when we think they should? Why does growth sometimes look like loss first? I don't pretend to have perfect answers, but I have seen something again and again. Something that sometimes felt like delay later revealed itself as protection. Sometimes what felt like silence became preparation. Sometimes the life you thought you wanted was too small for who you were becoming. Faith allows us to believe growth is happening even when clarity hasn't arrived yet. This podcast is for you if you are tired of burnout, if you want healthy relationships, if you're rebuilding after disappointment, if you are learning boundaries, if you are navigating grief, if you are starting over, you want faith that feels steady instead of performative, you want emotional peace, you want to live intentionally instead of reactive. And if I'm honest, there have been seasons in my own life when I too felt that way. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just have to be willing to pause long enough to reflect. Some of the episodes that I'll be doing will be longer, conversations like this one. Some will come from books I've written. Some will be short mental health tools that you can take into everyday life. Sunday episodes will lean into faith and reflection. But every episode will come back to the same idea, that healing happens quietly. Clarity grows slowly. Healthy love begins long before relationships begin. And you are allowed to build a life that feels aligned with who you actually are. There have been seasons in my own life when waiting felt uncomfortable, when I wondered why things were not moving forward the way I expected. Moments when I rushed toward things hoping clarity would come later. Other moments when I felt like everyone else was moving ahead while I stood still. Looking back now, those seasons shaped me more than the busy ones ever did. The waiting room became a teacher. I asked harder questions. What actually matters? Who am I becoming? What kind of life do I want to build? What kind of love do I want to give and receive? And slowly those answers changed everything. If you're in a waiting season, maybe you're here today because something feels uncertain. Maybe you're grieving. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you are rebuilding. Maybe you are hopeful but cautious. Maybe you are simply just wanting peace. If that's you, you're not alone. Waiting does not mean life is passing you by. Sometimes it means life is quietly rearranging itself into something stronger than you could have forced. Before we end today, I want to leave you with a few questions. Not to answer perfectly, just to consider. Where might life be inviting you to slow down instead of push harder? What part of yourself might be asking for healing instead of productivity? What would change if you believed preparation mattered as much as a revival? Not a revival, excuse me. Arrival. I'm not even going to cut this out either. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this conversation felt like a place you could breathe a little easier, I hope that you'll come back next week. We're going to keep talking about healing, relationships, faith, and how to build a life that feels peaceful instead of pressured. These conversations are invitations to reflect, not instructions for how anyone should live their life. Before we finish today, I want you to know this space will work going forward this way. On Sundays, we'll slow down together, a little more reflective, faith-based. Conversations about hope, healing, and trusting God through seasons that don't always make sense yet. On Tuesdays, we'll go deeper into bigger ideas from my books and the conversations I have every day as a nurse practitioner. Relationships, burnout, boundaries, and the quiet work of becoming. On Thursdays, I'll share shorter mini mental health episodes, simple, practical tools you can carry into everyday life right away. You don't have to listen to everything. Come when you need it. Stay as long as it helps. If today felt meaningful, we're just getting started. This Thursday, I'll share a shorter mini mental health conversation about emotional maturity and the everyday signs that help you recognize safety instead of confusion. Next Tuesday, we'll go deeper into what readiness actually looks like, how attraction, patterns, and emotional capacity shape the relationship we choose. Before we finish today, I want to gently remind you that this podcast is for education and reflection only. Listening does not create a therapeutic or provider relationship with me, and it is not a substitute for individualized medical or mental health care. If you are struggling or feel unsafe, please reach out for support. In the United States, you can call 911 or text 988, the National Suicide Crisis Line. You can also contact your primary care provider or search for licensed therapists in your area through trusted directories or your insurance network. Because every person's situation is unique, I'm not able to provide individual medical or mental health advice, diagnoses, or medication recommendations through this podcast, social media, or messaging platforms. Please speak directly with your own licensed provider for care specific to you. Listeners join this podcast from many different places, and while I'm grateful that you're here, please remember that laws, licensing requirements, and healthcare systems vary by location. The information shared here is general education and may not apply to your specific situation or region. If you are one of my current patients, please remember that questions or concerns about your care should always be discussed through your scheduled appointments or clinical communication channels, rather than through this podcast or social media spaces. I also want to say I read your messages, and I'm always grateful when people share how these conversations are helping them. Because this podcast is an educational space and not therapy, I'm not able to respond to personal clinical questions or provide individual guidance outside of professional care. If something here brings up strong feelings for you, I encourage you to reach out to a trusted support person or a licensed professional who can walk alongside you personally. Wherever you're listening today, driving, walking, folding laundry, or just sitting quietly, I hope you feel a little less alone. I hope you'll come back, keep the conversation going with me. If it encouraged you, consider sharing it with someone who might need it also. And remember this, healing rarely happens all at once. It grows quietly through small choices made with intention. Take what you need, leave what you don't, and keep living your life by design. I'll see you next time.